Welcome to the Creative Sobriety Podcast. This is Charlie, and this week we have an interview with Trevor. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Charlie.
Why don't you tell our audience a little bit about yourself?
So I'm 47. I've lived in California most of my life. I've been a nurse, a registered nurse for probably about 20 years now. I live in a small town. I've been married for 9 years to a really amazing woman. We don't have any kids, but we do love animals. We've had several dogs over the years and many cats. So I guess our animals are like our children.
How many cats do you have right now?
We have 4 right now.
Are they indoor or outdoor?
They're all indoor. There's lots of coyotes and mountain lions where we live. So outdoor cats don't tend to live very long, but they keep us entertained. They all have their own personalities and they're a bunch of goofballs.
I'm a cat guy myself, and that sounds like they're part of the food chain out there.
Definitely. Even owls can come down and take them from your yard. Some of ours are pretty small, so they definitely wouldn't be able to defend themselves.
So when is your Kratom quit date?
January 26th of 2026.
Congratulations, going on 8 months.
A little over 6.
When was the first time you encountered Kratom?
So interestingly, the first time I ever used Kratom, it was probably like 2006 or 2007. At that time, I was in nursing school and I don't know, maybe I was bored. I don't really know why I decided to try it, but I had been in college and stuff. I had been really interested in exploring different drugs, mostly psychedelics, LSD, psilocybin, mescaline. But I started to learn that there were drugs that you could get over the internet. At that time, you could get lots of different psychedelics on the internet. And I tried a bunch of those. And somehow through my research, I found out about Kratom. At that time, you could not buy it in stores anywhere. You had to mail order it. It was only available as like a whole leaf. I think I had to grind it up. And then I think I put it in a French press and made a tea out of it. And the first time I used it, I want to say I used about 10 grams. And I definitely got the full effects. It felt just like taking a couple of Percocet. But because my interest was mostly in psychedelics at that time, I just wasn't that interested in it. I think I used it a couple times and then I was like, meh, this is boring. So I put it down and I didn't pick it back up again.
And do you have any history of previous addiction?
I would say that there have been several points in my life, including before getting hooked on Kratom, when my use of alcohol was problematic. I wouldn't say that I have ever experienced being addicted to alcohol, but there have certainly been times when I was using more alcohol than was healthy by a significant amount. And I also realized that I've done many things under the influence of alcohol that I regretted later on. So whether or not that makes me an alcoholic, I'm not really sure. I choose not to use any alcohol at this time because I don't like its influence in my life and I don't want to tempt fate. There was also a time when I became physiologically dependent on benzodiazepines, and getting off of those was pretty rough. It involved a lot of anxiety and insomnia, but I don't know that I would characterize that as an addiction because once I was able to get off, I never had any desire to go back onto those again. So once I kicked that habit, it never came back. So I guess I have those two experiences, but those were both very different than my experience with Kratom. I've had dental procedures. I've broken my leg. I believe the Percocet was from one of my ankle surgeries. I had what's called a bimalleolar fracture. So I had to have surgery for that and ended up getting the hardware removed probably many years later. And I've also had knee surgery. So I've had several orthopedic surgeries along the way.
But it sounds like none of those left you having troubles with prescriptions.
Let's put it this way. When doctors would prescribe me opioids, I would always go through the entire supply. And then because the availability was gone, I simply would stop using them. But I was never one of those people that would take one Vicodin and then leave the rest, except for this last knee surgery. Because I was actively in recovery at that time, I did use a single Vicodin for that surgery. And then I realized after the fact that I didn't even need that one. And so I just got rid of the rest of the pills. I didn't end up using them because I didn't want to go back into that cycle. But every other time, other than that, every other time I've been prescribed opioids, I would use the entire supply. So I definitely always had an affinity for them. It just never became a problem in the same way as Kratom because the availability was not there. And so I was never someone that sought out opioids. Once the supply was gone, it's just like, oh, okay, that was fun, but we'll move on now.
Did all those procedures leave you with any lingering pain or health issues?
Not really. I have to be a little careful with my knees, but other than that, no, my ankles, I'd say 95 to 99% good. And my knees definitely aren't what they were in my 20s, but I'm in my late 40s. So I don't know if I can really expect them to be.
When we get to the mid-century mark, things change. Why did you return to Kratom some 10 years later after your initial introduction to it?
That's a good question. I think I've thought about that a lot because I don't really think I thought about it very carefully at the time. And it was a time in which my then girlfriend, now wife, and I were living in separate cities. She was going to school and I was working. And so I think I was lonely. And also I might have been trying to look for something that was an alternative to alcohol, trying to drink less, but still wanted something to change my consciousness. And I remembered Kratom and was like, maybe it's worth trying it again. And so when I tried it the second time around, rather than just like sitting around in my house, which is what I did the first time, I used it and went out and did things. And then all of a sudden it seemed like this amazing thing. It seemed like a cheat code almost, like I could go to the gym and just work out for hours, or I could go out climbing and just climb for many hours longer than I normally would want to, just because everything felt so amazing at first. So I was definitely a lot more excited about it the second time around. And I think that's because of the way that I used it was different. When I combined it with activities that I actually liked, all of a sudden it seemed like this amazing drug, which the first time when I just took it and sat around, it just didn't seem very interesting to me.
And did you start off using powder?
So that, like I said, when I used it the first time in 2006 or whatever, it was the leaf, just whole leaves. And then when I got it the second time around in 2016, 2017, I ordered bulk powder online. And then I think I tried to make a tea out of the powder and it just didn't really work because it was a powder. And so I ended up putting it into gel capsules and just taking the capsules, and that seemed to work. And I didn't progress to anything else for years after that because by that time the extracts weren't even available. I don't think I tried the extracts until probably 2022, 2023 maybe. It's hard to remember the exact time frame, but I was a powder user for a long time.
All right. And did you use daily, and how much were your doses and how often did you take it?
At first I would say I used recreationally. So I would use it. I would go several days without it, and then I would use it again. I just used it sporadically, just as like an enhancer to whatever it was I was doing. And then gradually over the course of years, it got more and more. At first, my wife even joined in and took it with me a few times. I think we even took some on our honeymoon while we were like going out and hiking. But after a short period of time, she decided that there was something about it she did not like. And so she stopped using it. Like, I think it tended to make her nauseous. And maybe she had some premonition of that it was bad news, some sort of feeling that I didn't have. So over the course of years, it got more and more frequent. I'm not sure if it became daily prior to this, but my use really escalated in 2019. I had an injury. I didn't end up needing surgery, but I did have to be off work for a month, and it was quite painful. And they did prescribe me Vicodin, which I took as prescribed, but I also took Kratom in between the Vicodin. And so during that month, I was using it all day, every day. And that's pretty much how it continued after that.
Okay. Did you experience withdrawals or tolerance during this period of time?
Right. My tolerance was definitely building up, and I didn't know that I was experiencing withdrawals, but in retrospect, that's what it was. But at that time, I did not take it while I was at work. I had like a rule that I did not want to use it while I was at work. So all the way through 2019, I would be sober while I was at work. But in 2019, especially after I came back from this injury, I noticed that I was getting increasingly anxious at work. And it was in hindsight, it's because I was going into withdrawals, and I would just be like watching the clock, waiting to get off work. And then I would go home and dose right away, or dose in the car on the way home. So in hindsight, yes, I was experiencing withdrawals on like a daily basis because I worked as a nurse. I worked 12-hour shifts. I'd get up in the morning. I wouldn't use. I'd be at work all day. I wouldn't get off until 7. So it was like a 21-hour period of not using. And then I'd have this narrow little window to use. And then, of course, on my days off, I would be using all day again. So at some point, I kind of realized that I was actually safer at work if I would use a little bit so that I wouldn't be in withdrawals rather than crawling out of my skin. A small dose at that point would just make me feel normal. And that's when I started to realize that this might be a problem. So that was probably like early 2020. And around about that same time is when my wife expressed that she was really concerned about my use. And I was like, okay, I can see your point. I tried to quit. At that point, I want to say I was probably using, we'll say probably 30 grams a day, maybe not every day, but on average, probably upwards of 30 grams. And then obviously I couldn't just quit cold turkey off that, although I did try. And then, okay, that's not going to work. So I tapered down and I managed to quit by March of 2020 or so. So it took me probably January, February, March to taper. And the only reason I was even able to taper was because I was still being honest with my wife at that time, and she was able to hold me accountable. So later on, when I started using in secret, that would not have been possible, because once I started using in secret, I lost all self-control.
So you found yourself off of Kratom at the beginning of the pandemic, huh?
Exactly. So that first quit, I made a lot of mistakes. I didn't do any recovery work. I didn't even really think it was necessarily something that I needed to do. I just was like, okay, I got off that. I can just move on with my life. And it was the pandemic. Nobody knew which way was up. Started using a lot of alcohol again daily. And that wasn't a great deal. I was already starting to secretly dabble with the Kratom again every once in a while, getting a dose here, a dose there. And before I knew it, I was back to using daily again, only this time it was in secret. I eventually got caught because my wife found a Kratom capsule on the ground and I came clean. She was very hurt, very upset. At that time, I hadn't actively lied about it because I just didn't say anything about it, which clearly that is also dishonesty, but it wasn't quite the same as lying to someone's face, which that did come later. So she was quite hurt, but not as devastated as this last relapse. But she basically asked me, what do we need to do? And I expressed that I probably should taper off again. And so I did again, tapered off. I would buy a small amount, use it for a couple of days and then stop. And then a few weeks later, I'd do it again. And then those few weeks got shorter and shorter. I started doing it more often. And then pretty soon I was using it daily again. Only this time I wasn't telling anyone. And what I ended up doing, my wife and I went on this trip. We went to the desert. We were camping out for 2 weeks in the middle of the desert and doing some rock climbing. And I purposefully did not bring enough Kratom to last the whole time. And my plan was to taper a little bit and then jump off at some point during this trip. But instead, I didn't even taper. I was using probably 50 grams a day at that point. My usage had increased quite a bit. So I would say I was up to about 50 grams a day. And I didn't taper at all. I just used 50 grams a day until I ran out. And I ran out about a week into the trip, maybe 5 days into the trip, and there was still probably 10 days to go. And yes, I went through acute withdrawals in the middle of the desert, and I just pretended to have the flu, honestly. And I was around some of my friends. They were on this trip too, and everyone just thought I was sick. And I was, but I knew why, and nobody else knew why. And somehow I managed to do this without alerting anyone to what was going on. And I actually succeeded in being out there in the desert. I didn't know where to get Kratom. And in my mind, I wanted to quit anyway. I just bit the bullet and accepted that I was going to feel like shit. And I sacrificed this trip in order to get off. And then so stupidly, because I wasn't honest and because I wasn't doing any recovery work, the same thing started happening about 6 months later. I was only off for probably 6 months before I started dabbling in it again and then fell right back into it. So that was the cold turkey quit in the desert. But what did occur to me was that their medically assisted treatment could possibly help me. So at that time, and I want to say that was probably beginning of 2023 at this point. And by this time, I had discovered the extracts and I was using the extracts. So my withdrawals this time around were a lot more severe. And so at this time, I went and got onto Suboxone, which worked really well for me. Actually, I was prescribed the medication by a telehealth provider. I told them exactly what was going on. They gave me the prescription. Within 2 hours, I had the medication. And within a few hours after taking it, the withdrawal was completely gone. And so I was on that I've actually been on Suboxone ever since. I was in 2023. And I've had several relapses even since then. So clearly it wasn't a magic bullet. It didn't fix my problem. It just took the withdrawal away. I did go to an IOP. I was quite active in my recovery. And I want to say I was able to stay sober for probably 9 months. But what ended up happening was that I tried to taper off of the Suboxone. After a certain amount of months, I started to try to taper, working with the doctor and going to smaller and smaller amounts. But so by that fall, I started to run out just a day or two early. And if you run out a day early, you can maybe just white knuckle it through. But if you run out 3 days early, you're in trouble. And because of the DEA controls are very strict about it, you can't go get more, or at least I didn't think I could. So I started solving my own problem by just going and getting a little bit of Kratom. And of course, that led me right back into another period of relapse.
A couple of questions and you can give kind of short answers. Looking back at that one time after your very first quit during the pandemic, do you know what was going through your mind? Why you returned to Kratom after that initial break?
I don't really. I honestly don't. I think that, to be honest, I think that the whatever issues that it was that led me to use in the first place had not been resolved. I had done no work in recovery. I didn't know anything about recovery at that time. I hadn't been exposed to any of the ideas. I had no support system other than my wife, because I was very ashamed of this issue. I didn't tell anyone. And with that first quit, my wife didn't tell anyone either. She felt like it was our dirty little secret and she had to protect me, and maybe she felt ashamed of it too. So she didn't tell anyone. So she was the only one that I could tell. And when I would start to have these cravings, I didn't feel, I don't know, maybe I was afraid to talk to her about it, and there wasn't anyone else that I could talk to about it. So I essentially had no support network at all.
It's very isolating. You're doing it alone. And how did you find your way to extracts? Did you just go into a vape shop and they were there, or you see something on social media?
I want to say that was probably 2022, 2023. So at that time, using in secret, I was just going to the smoke shop to get Kratom. And I was always in this cycle of thinking I was going to quit, trying to quit, just buying small amounts at a time, telling myself these things that in hindsight were clearly ridiculous. Oh, I'll just use today and then I'll quit tomorrow. I was always in that cycle of like feeling guilty, feeling ashamed, wanting to quit, just buying the smallest amount that I could, and then heading back to the smoke shop the same day to buy more when it turned out to not be enough. So at some point I noticed these little extract pills. At first I tried the extract pills. Later I tried the liquid extracts, and I found that those were a lot stronger than the extract pills. So of course I naturally gravitated towards it.
And how much were you on the extract stage? How much were you spending a day?
Good question. I think the first time I ever used the extracts, I used like two of the liquid ones. So that would be like, what is that, $36? Not a crazy amount compared to what it ended up being with 7.0, but I want to say probably average was like two of the extract bottles, the little black ones.
What kind of nursing are you in?
At the time when I was going through most of my Kratom addiction, I was in the emergency department. Now I work in outpatient, so my life is actually a lot calmer. A lot of the stress of the ER has been removed by moving to a different department. I'm not sure in hindsight what accounted for what, but working in the emergency department is a very stressful job. And I'm sure that contributed at times to my feelings of needing something in order to de-stress.
Have you ever in the ER seen somebody come in with problems with the Kratom ever?
I have. I've seen Kratom withdrawal come into the ER. That was several years ago. I've never seen any acute overdose with Kratom. But like I said, I live in a small town. It may not be as prevalent here as it is in other places.
Okay. Returning to your timeline, you entered medicated assisted treatment and it helped with the withdrawals, but you ended up using again. Why don't you talk about the process of how, even though while you were on Suboxone, you found yourself using 7-OH?
So while I was on the Suboxone, I was stable for a while, probably about 6 months, and I didn't change the dose. I just took the dose that the doctors prescribed. I was active in an IOP at that time. I was active in other recovery groups, and that was all really helpful. And I felt pretty solid at that time. But little by little, I started participating less and less in the recovery groups, and then I started to feel like maybe I didn't need the Suboxone anymore. So I started the process of tapering off the Suboxone. But what ended up happening was that I think I put a lot of pressure on myself to hold to a particular schedule. And I would tell the doctor one thing, and I wasn't being entirely honest with my wife, and I wasn't being entirely honest with the doctor. I was painting a more rosy picture of things because I guess I felt like I needed to hold to a particular standard. And so I'd tell the doctor, oh, I think I only need four milligrams a day for this month or whatever. And then what would happen is that I would end up using up the Suboxone before I was supposed to, and I would run out a day early, maybe 2 days early. And so that started happening that fall. And the first time or two that it happened, I was able to just get through it. But then eventually it occurred to me that I had a solution to when it ran out early. I could just go use a little bit of Kratom for a day or two, and then that would get me through to the next prescription. And I did that a couple times, and it didn't become a problem, but eventually it did become a problem because I just was reminding myself of what Kratom felt like. And of course, this whole time I wasn't being forthcoming. I wasn't being honest about what was going on. And so pretty soon I fell right back into using. Only this time I was using it on top of the Suboxone. And what happened, the way that I ended up on 7-OH was I would go and get those black bottles, and there must have been a bad batch or something, because I remember opening one and taking a swig of it, and all of a sudden there was like objects in my mouth, and I spat it out. I was like, what the hell? And I looked inside the bottle, and there were like little worms inside the bottle of extract.
Wow.
It was absolutely disgusting. And so I took it back to the smoke shop and I showed it to the guy, and I was like, what the hell is this? This is not good. I can't drink this. There's worms in it. And so he's like, oh, okay. He's like, we have these. And then he showed me like the blister packs of the 7. And then as soon as I tried that, I never went back to the extracts.
I've never heard such a thing, and I can imagine you never maybe wanting to take a swig of a Kratom extract again.
And I wondered about that. Maybe it was just some weird formation of the sediment within the bottle that it took the shape of worms, because I don't know how worms could survive inside of a bottle of Kratom extract. But it sure as hell, I swear to God, it looked like dozens of little tiny maggots inside the bottle, and I could not drink it. And I showed it to the guy, and he was like, oh no, that's no good. He agreed with me. So,
you're right. It might have just botched up together. Some of those, sometimes it gets all fermented and all sorts of things. You alluded to this at the beginning of the interview. Why do you think you wanted to use Kratom? What need was it? I know originally you maybe to avoid alcohol, but have you figured out why you use Kratom?
I would say that's a tricky question. I don't know that there was necessarily a why. In the beginning, clearly it was like, it felt like a performance boost and all this stuff, but that doesn't explain why I kept going back to it once it clearly was a problem. But I think our brains become wired to want that hit of satisfaction. And whether or not we want to admit it to ourselves, we know where we can get it from. Once we've opened that box, our brains remember. And so that those intrusive thoughts would come back from time to time. And just the availability of it, the fact that you can just go down the street and pick it up and get that little boost. If you're having a bad day, you're feeling stressed out. But honestly, I don't even think I needed an excuse necessarily. I would just use it under any circumstances. But
okay. So when was it you first did the 7-OH?
That would have been the fall of 2024. Wait, is that right? That would have been the fall of 2024.
Okay. And why don't you tell us about that period of time when you first picked up 7-OH to when you finally were able to quit? What happened during that block of time?
So the first time around, I didn't use it for very long. It was like a month, maybe. It wasn't a huge long time. But I was really struggling with it. I could tell it was bad. I was going to meetings even. I was like telling people in recovery what was going on. And I still just couldn't get off of it because I wasn't being honest with my wife, I think. And at some point, she asked me what was going on, and I admitted to it. And clearly, she was heartbroken because we'd been through this cycle before with the other relapses. And so what I ended up doing was I hadn't been forthcoming with the doctor either, as I told you. So I got a new doctor at that time, and I went and I just was completely honest with the doctor. They didn't change my dose very much, but they increased my dose of Suboxone a little bit. And I think just the motivation of being honest and really wanting to get clean for this relationship that means the world to me, and also for myself, knowing how terrible I felt, how powerless I felt using, and somehow that allowed me to kick the 7-0 the first time. However, I was still on the films, and the same issue would reoccur approximately a year later.
You'd go through your monthly supply of the Suboxone, but you'd use it more than it would take you through the end of the month. So you needed to bridge between being able to get the new prescription picked up.
Yes, exactly. Only this time I wasn't I wasn't even trying to taper. So I have no excuse. I was just compulsively using more of the films than I was supposed to. And so my conclusion with that is that I just don't have the ability to manage the films, period. And they were not a good solution for me for that reason. Even though some people talk about abusing the Suboxone, and I know what that means because I've done it. It means compulsively using it, even though you know that it's not in your best interest. But what's really strange about it is that to me, it didn't feel any different. And yet I would do it anyway. It's the strangest thing. Like, I don't think I can tell the difference between taking 8 milligrams and taking 12 milligrams. And yet I would do it anyway. And then I would run out early. And so the same thing happened again. Only the last time, this last relapse, I never came clean about it. The first time on 7-0, I hit it. And then as soon as my wife actually asked me about it, I denied it up front. And then within the next hour, I came to her and told her that was a lie I've been using. And then I told her the whole thing. This last time, I lied and kept doubling down, kept telling her everything was fine when it wasn't. I was completely out of control. I was using more and more 7 every day. And I kept telling myself I would use less. I kept trying so hard to have some level of control over it. And it just kept moving in the wrong direction. It was the most terrifying thing I've ever been through. It was honestly like being trapped in a nightmare from which you cannot awake. I never felt good. I felt just like awful and just using just to stave off the withdrawals. And that's when my usage got to the extreme amount that I quoted you in the
Like 1,800 milligrams and $450 a day at top.
That would be a bad day, but there were a lot of days when I would use less than that, but then the next day I'd be right back to it again. And just telling myself so many lies and believing them somehow, even though like all evidence pointed to the contrary. It was just the complete loss of control and the complete, they'd say, utter and total demoralization. That is what I experienced. And I was panicked. I was completely panicked because after that first relapse on 7-0, my wife had told me that this is the last time I can ever go through this. If you do this again, we're done. And it wasn't a threat. It was just her honestly expressing how she felt. And so when I relapsed again the next time, I honestly thought, I can't tell her. I can't tell her. I was terrified. And that had been the case basically every time. I was always terrified because I didn't want her to be hurt. I didn't want her to leave me. And on some level, I think I was also protecting the addiction itself. Maybe part of me didn't want to stop, but I was absolutely convinced that when she found out, she was going to be gone. And so I just kept doubling down and kept lying. And I was just terrified that entire time. And I did not like what was happening. I didn't like what I was becoming, but I did not feel any power to influence the trajectory of my life, let alone to drastically change.
How did you finally end this nightmare and were able to stop?
My wife finally called me out. She finally asked me, what's going on? Something's going on. She knew. and I finally admitted to it. And the interesting thing, she admitted to it, I admitted to her. She called me out, and I admitted to her what had been going on. I told her, and from that moment, I have not used since. And I could attribute my sobriety to the fact that the next day I went to the doctor and they scheduled me for Sublocade, and I did get switched to the Sublocade, which did work a lot better for me than the films, 1,000% better. I wish I would have done that a long time ago. I had the option and I didn't do it because I was afraid. For some reason, I was afraid of the Sublocade and I didn't do it. But I sure wish that I had. But anyway, that doesn't account for the fact that from that moment, when I admitted to her what was going on, I have not used. It took me the rest of that week to get in with the doctor and get the shot. And I didn't use that first day, waiting for my initial appointment, because they were able to see me the next day. They weren't able to give me the shot the next day, but they were able to see me and talk to me. And they did increase my dose of the Suboxone, the films, as like the bridge until I could get the shot. But that first day I was just in terrible withdrawals, but somehow it ceased being an option to me. And I don't even know, it wasn't even that my relationship depended on it, because I was pretty convinced that it was done. I don't really know what it was, but I was just really determined that I was done with it. I think it had caused me so much harm by that point. I was so upset with myself. I was so heartbroken by the fact that the love of my life was going to be walking out the door, and there was nothing I could do at this point because I'd made too many mistakes. I was so upset that it turned into a determination, and it didn't matter how much physical discomfort that I was suffering. I was not going to go and use. And I didn't. And I haven't since then. That was the day that I told her was January the 25th. And I haven't touched any Kratom, any 7-0. I haven't touched a sip of alcohol. I haven't taken a single drag off of a joint, nothing since that day. And I don't plan to.
Woo, I'm just so happy for you. And a lot of things to talk about. I'm just on the medicated assistant treatment route. I'm glad Sublocade is working for you. It sounds like it got rid of the films and the counting and running out each month. It totally eliminated that.
The films were just not a good solution for me. I have learned that I simply cannot be trusted to be my own pharmacist in any sense of the word. And that includes the films, even though, like I said, I don't really get a benefit from them in terms of when you take Kratom, at least you feel something. I didn't even feel any different, and yet I would still misuse them. And I don't have a good explanation as to why that is, but I needed to have that control taken out of my hands.
You're not alone. That's one of the reasons why that doesn't work for some people. And the compulsion to, take more than prescribed gets transferred from the Kratom to the medication, and the effects are different, but you get some of the same problems. But the problem, one of the challenges with Sublocade, the injection, is it can be cost prohibitive for some people, and sometimes insurance doesn't cover it. But if you are able to take advantage of that, that is the right choice for some people. And you were able to feel the effects of 7-OH even while you were on.
I think that's part of the reason why I eventually got to such a high dose, is because I never stopped using the Suboxone. I was just using the 7-OH on top of it. And the reason that I never stopped using the Suboxone is because I was in this cycle of denial where I kept telling myself, I'm going to quit tomorrow. I'll take the Suboxone tomorrow and then I'll be okay. But what would happen was that I would actually have withdrawal even with the Suboxone because I was using 7-OH and it was so strong. But then I would have to use more 7-OH than usual because I was on the Suboxone. It was like this vicious cycle where I was like, the two drugs were like fighting for control of my mind. And the Suboxone blocks many of your opioid receptors, but there's still some that aren't blocked. And those ones that aren't blocked are still susceptible to being stimulated by a strong opioid like 7-OH. And if you're using a large amount of 7-OH, a normal dose of Suboxone is not going to be sufficient to completely remove your withdrawal symptoms, which is definitely what I experienced that first day when I stopped using the 7-OH. I was still on the Suboxone at that time, and I definitely had, I would say it was as bad as quitting Kratom cold turkey.
And during those, I think it was during the 7-OH Suboxone period, it sounded like you were going to some meetings and you were trying to participate in recovery.
That the first time that I was using the 7 on top of the Suboxone, I was actually going to meetings because I desperately wanted to get off of it. And it just wasn't enough because I wasn't being honest with the people around me in my real life. It didn't matter what I said to people online. There was no accountability for me. So that it wasn't enough, unfortunately.
That alone, yeah, a self-help group like that, it's predicated on you being open and honest. And do you mind, what kind of, were you doing AA? Were you doing Kratom meetings? What type of format were you trying?
At that time, I was participating in what's called Medication Assisted Recovery Anonymous, which is it's a 12-step AA alternative group. And I love those people. I'm not participating in that group right now, but they are really kind and supportive. And during that quit, once I was honest with my wife and I did manage to get off, it was helpful to participate in that group. What I ended up finding in the end was that Kratom specific recovery groups were better for me because there's a lot of features to Kratom use that I think are specific to Kratom and 7.0. And having a community that really understands what it's like to be addicted to Kratom and 7.0 has been crucial for me in this 6 months of sobriety that I've had so far.
Great. So that's your part of your support system that you're using now to stay sober. Tell us a little bit more about those meetings and what kind of program you're working.
I did attend AA as well. I did work through the 12 steps with a sponsor, but what I ended up settling on is my daily meetings were the online Kratom specific meetings. And there's a few to choose from online. And I'm transitioning from one group to another right now, but the community that I've made and the connections that I've made just with people that understand, there's so much commonality there. And to have a community that really understands what you're going through and that you're not afraid to talk to because they've all been exactly where you've been. But that's just been like super important to me. I also got a lot out of working through the 12 steps. I don't attend AA meetings on the whole, but I did get a lot out of working through the steps. And I did attend quite a few AA meetings in the beginning. I just felt a little out of place there because I never felt like alcohol was my primary problem. And I never really felt comfortable enough to share what I had really been going through because I didn't think that they would understand.
And Kratom specific groups make sense. It sounds like it's the substance that got the most out of control over that 10-year period of time. And
yeah, I did work with a sponsor in AA for the first, we'll say 3 or 4 months. And I also have a therapist that I was seeing every week. Now we've stepped it down a little bit because I don't feel like it's necessary to have therapy every week anymore, but those were both super helpful. I ended up having some personal differences with my sponsor from AA, and so ended that relationship, but I got a lot out of it, and I'm really glad that I did it. It was super important for me.
Okay. One last look back in the past. So what was the worst consequences, and just to summarize the damages of your use, just to put that in the rear view mirror, and you're not going to go back there, but looking back, what kind of toll did it take on you, your Kratom and 7-OH addiction?
Oh man, there's so much, but I would say that the worst part was just the complete destruction of any sense of self-esteem whatsoever, complete loss of self-respect, the crazy amounts of shame and guilt, being in this place where you feel that it is necessary to lie to the people that you love the most in this world. It's impossible to have any self-love or self-respect when that is your daily reality. And the amount of damage that it's done to my relationship, the amount of harm that it has caused my partner is huge. I will see her start to panic when, even so much as if I get quiet for a little bit or I won't look her in the eye, I can see the anxiety start to build in her. And it just breaks my heart because I know that she is traumatized by what I have put her through. And I'm doing my best not to exist in a state of shame anymore because that's not helpful. That's not going to help me stay clean. I need to continue to find reasons to love myself and respect myself. And I am doing that day to day. And I've come a long ways in the last 6 months, but the harms that this has caused is just astronomical. And that's not even taking into account the financial harm. I'm still paying off my credit cards that I ran up with that crazy daily 7-0 habit. That's not counting any physical harms that my body may have suffered or any sort of permanent damage that may have been done to my mind. I have no idea. I feel really lucky because I feel like I escaped some of the worst physical harms that people talk about. And that may be because when I was using 7-0, the Suboxone may have protected me to some extent because it was partially blocked my receptors. I really never used 7-0 without already being on Suboxone, so I don't really even know what that's like. So that may have protected me, actually. I don't know. But I feel pretty okay on a day-to-day basis these days. And I'm really just trying to move forward and not beat myself up anymore because I've done that enough and it didn't get me anywhere. It didn't help. Existing in that state of shame for me just created more negative emotions that I then felt the need to numb. And that just brought me right back to using more Kratom or more extracts or more 7-0. So finding reasons to be proud of myself and creating those reasons, living a positive life and doing positive things for myself and for other people. Those are what I try to focus on.
Yeah, that pretty heavy response when you put it together all like that. I really felt that, and especially your relationship with your wife. That sounds like that's a burden, but I'm glad you're moving forward. And do you have a concrete relapse prevention plan, since that seems to be part of your story, is returning? And is this the longest period you've been off of Kratom?
I am not sure entirely. I don't think so. This is longer than probably the previous period was. But I think that the very first time I quit, I think I was off for 9 months or maybe even a year. I don't really remember, to be honest, but I don't think this is the longest. And no, I don't necessarily have a concrete relapse prevention plan. What I can say is that what I have learned is that when I stop actively participating in my own recovery, that is when the troubles seem to arise for me. So I am still, even 6 months out, I still go to a meeting pretty much every single day. And I am in contact with the members of my support community on a regular basis. I feel very comfortable with them. I know that there's at least a dozen people that I could contact right now if I was struggling, and they would be happy to talk to me. And as far as a relapse prevention plan, I feel very fortunate that I don't currently struggle with any cravings. And I'm not sure if that's because I'm still on the Sublocade, but it's not something that I deal with on a day-to-day basis. But I know that I can have the support that I need at a moment's notice. If I start feeling that craving, I know where I can turn. And no, there's not really a formal plan per se, but I feel much safer now with the network of people in recovery that I've connected to than I really ever have before. All right. So what has changed now that has allowed me to stay sober? In order to understand that, I think it's important to understand how different this last relapse was for me. So last summer, I was clean, I was sober, I had a great summer. My wife and I went backpacking. Our relationship was healing from the prior dishonesty and the damage that I had inflicted on it. Everything was going great. And in my mind, there was no way I was going to go back to Kratom again. I was so happy, but I was not participating in any kind of recovery groups. I just thought, I don't want to use this anymore. And I'm very clear on that in my mind. And that's just the end of the story. But I wasn't building any kind of guardrails. I didn't have any kind of support network in place, and that ended up biting me in the ass. So this fall, that same compulsive behavior started happening again with the Suboxone, where every once in a while I would just take a little bit extra. I don't even know why, because I was having a hard day, and in my mind, maybe I thought it would make me feel better, which it never really did. Honestly, I don't think I could tell the difference in a blind test between 8 milligrams and 10 milligrams, or even between 8 milligrams and 12 milligrams. But that compulsive use was there. And so I started running out of the Suboxone early again. And the same thing started happening. Only this time I went and when I ran out early and I was going into acute withdrawals, I went and got 7.0 and instead of regular Kratom. And as soon as I used it, my wife was out of town at the time when this happened. And maybe I was lonely too. Maybe there was some loneliness happening. Maybe that contributed to why I went out and picked it up again. Because nearly every time that I have relapsed, it's been when I was alone. And I used to think of that as an opportunity. And then I think little by little, I've realized that, yes, it was an opportunity thing, but also I didn't have anyone there to talk to. I didn't have anyone there for emotional support. And I probably was feeling lonely and maybe bored and unstimulated. But be that as it may, I went and picked up the 7.0. And as soon as I used it, this time there was no gradual progression. As soon as I used it, I was right back to off to the races, using it all day, every day, straight from the jump. And that it shocked me that I even started again. It shocked me how quickly it escalated. And then it also shocked me how completely I lost control because my life became a a living nightmare. Literally every single day was like the day before, and every single day I was terrified. My wife had told me that if I relapsed again, she was going to leave me, and I was 100% convinced that that was the case. And I was also 100% convinced that it was only a matter of time until I got caught. And I wanted to quit so badly, but I could not seem to muster the power necessary to actually quit. And an additional complicating factor was that I had lied to her. She asked me if I was doing okay, and I said yes when I was not. And I was very invested in this lie because I was convinced that if that lie were to be revealed, that my marriage was going to be done for and my wife was going to leave and I would be left alone. And I think being alone is one of my biggest fears. So I was terrified, but I could not, even with all that fear, I could not seem to reduce my usage in the slightest, let alone stop. And eventually I got caught. My wife called me out and I couldn't lie anymore. I told her what was going on. She was devastated. She was heartbroken. She was traumatized. And from that moment, when I told her and got honest with her, I have not used since. And that was a little over 6 months ago. What changed, I think, was that I got desperate. I was so desperate to escape this nightmare that I found myself in. And it was such a stark contrast to the beautiful, happy life full of joy and love that I had experienced the prior summer. I I was well aware of the fact that I had traded that for this living hell that just repeated itself day in, day out. So when I finally quit, I was absolutely desperate to do anything, to do whatever it took to stop using no matter what. And so I looked for things that I had not tried before. I was willing to try anything. And we talked about the Sublocade, but also the obvious choice was to try 12-step. I had never given 12-step an honest chance before. And so I started going to AA, even though alcohol wasn't my primary problem. It was just what was available. I got a sponsor. I worked with the sponsor. As we worked through the steps, I realized that step one admitted we were powerless over our addiction and that our lives had become unmanageable. I realized that I had already taken that step, that during my relapse, I had come to that realization that I was powerless. I could not stop. I was not in control. When that substance was in my body, I did not have any control over it. And then I realized that even just by being willing to humble myself and reach out for help outside of myself, I had already taken step two, came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. And to me, that doesn't necessarily mean God. It just means being willing to look outside of yourself because whatever it is that you're doing at that moment, it's not working. And that was the case for me. What I was doing was not working. I needed to look outside of myself. I needed to humble myself. I needed to ask for help. And so I did all of those things. My sponsor took me through step 3, which is, oh, shoot, what's step 3? This will go on the blooper reel. Oh, I'm having a total brain fart. That's funny. Oh yeah, what was it? Became willing to give our lives and our will over to a God of our understanding, more or less. Uh, and to me, how that was described to me was that it's not that God's going to take care of everything for you, and you can just sit there. It's that you have a contract with the universe, with God, with whatever, and that contract is essentially that as long as you do your part, you will be provided with what you need. It won't necessarily be what you want. It won't necessarily be what you had imagined for yourself, but it will be what you need. And so that going through that introduced me to the concept of faith. And I'd never really had faith in anything before. I was an atheist, and then eventually I became an agnostic, and I'm still an agnostic in the sense that I don't have any idea what this word God really means. I'm starting to know what it means to me, but I don't really know. I can't know the secrets of the universe, but I am having faith that as long as I continue to make the next right choice, that I will find that I am provided with what I need. And it won't always be what I want. In fact, many times it will not be what I want. And it won't always be what I expect or what I imagine, but it will be what I need. And all I have to do is keep making that next right choice. And I was very determined to do that, because I did not want to go back into that living nightmare that I had so recently escaped from. So I just kept making the next right choice. We worked through steps 4 through 9, which are all about cleaning up the mess that you made of your life. It's about, taking accountability for the things that you did. It's about making amends to the people that you have harmed, and going through those steps. I had conversations that I had never had before. I talked to all of my friends, obviously, my wife, and I had talked to my wife about this. She was really the only person that I ever talked to about my addiction. And so through the amends process, I had to reach out to a lot of people, all of our close friends, both of my wife's parents and my mother. And, I had never had this kind of open conversation about this addiction before. I did not make amends to my father. I don't really perceive that I had harmed my father, but that's neither here nor there. Having these conversations with the people that were close to me was hugely helpful. And what I discovered was that I had lived in fear for so long that if I really revealed who I really was to the people that were close to me in my life, that they would think that I wasn't worth being close to, that they would leave me and I would find myself alone. That was my deepest fear. And I found that was not the case. I found that when I was honest with people and when I really talked to people and revealed what I had been going through, that they were compassionate and supportive. Not a single person was harsh with me. My father-in-law was a little firm, but I wouldn't say harsh. And everyone else was just super compassionate and understanding. And I was surprised. That was not how I imagined that was going to go. And I started to realize that this whole time, when I thought that I was protecting myself by keeping this a secret, I wasn't actually protecting myself. What I was really doing was protecting the addiction itself. And I was not actually acting in my own best interest, because the people that loved me wanted to help me. They wanted the best for me. They wanted me to be happy. They wanted me to be free. And by keeping this a secret, I was eliminating the chance that any of them could help me, because I wasn't talking to them. And I started to realize that those thoughts, that tendency to want to hide and keep this a secret, that thought wasn't in my best interest. And through that realization, I started to realize that I was having other thoughts that were not in my best interest. Come to find out later that this realization has a name. It's called AVRT, which I think stands for Addict Voice Recognition Training. where you learn to recognize those thoughts that are protecting the addiction rather than protecting you. And in my mind, I started to imagine that those thoughts belonged to Kratom itself, that Kratom or 7 or whatever had a spirit that was whispering in my mind and telling me things. And the thoughts sounded like they were in my own voice, but really they were the voice of Kratom. Or another way to imagine it would be they were the voice of the addiction. And those thoughts were acting in the best interest of the addiction or in the best interest of Kratom. They were not in my own best interest. And I learned to tell the difference between thoughts that were in my own best interest and thoughts that were in the interest of the addiction. And I stopped obeying them. I knew that they were lies now. I could tell that they were trying to get me, those thoughts were trying to get me to do things that were self-destructive. And I was determined not to fall for it again. So I practiced that, and I worked eventually through all 12 steps. Steps 10 through 12 are about maintenance of your sobriety, daily inventory, daily prayer and meditation, and the helping of others. And I've done all of those things now. And through listening to this podcast, I discovered the Kratom specific communities and participated in those. Those have really been the mainstay of my support groups, even though the one that I participate in the most is not 12-step. I found that there was something magical about being in a room full of people that had suffered from exactly the same issues that I had suffered from. People that I was completely comfortable talking to because I knew they had done all the same things and that they weren't going to judge me because they really understood from their own experience what it was that I had gone through. That was critically important to me. And through participating in those groups, I was able to start to let go of some of the shame that I felt around this issue. That was critically important as well, because the more shame that I hold on to, the more negative feelings that I have that I may need to numb. And letting go of that shame was definitely critical in terms of being able to come to a place in life that I no longer felt the need to escape from. And so that pretty much brings us to today and my life now. And my relationship has not completely healed. It's starting to heal. And I am just overjoyed by that because my wife is the most important person in the world to me. I love her to the moon and back. And I can't believe the things that I did in my addiction. I do believe them. I know that I did them. But it's really shocking to me what I did and how much I hurt her. And I don't ever want to do that again. But somehow, some way, she has managed to stay with me, and we're working towards healing, and that's incredible. I don't really have cravings on a day-to-day basis. I'm so grateful for that. It's not something that I really have to fight against anymore, but I do still participate in my support group communities on a daily basis. That's super helpful for me. I try to help others. I try to express my experience and strength and hope to those who are still struggling or who are new into their sobriety and who may be going through more difficult times. And I would say that now I have come back to a place where I no longer feel any desire to escape from this life. I've found an acceptance and a peace inside that I realized I could have had this whole time. And when I look back at all the use and all the harm that it did to me, I think, gosh, what a fool I was that I felt the need to escape from this life in the first place, because this life is great. We only get one of these lives. At least that's what I believe. I only have one chance to be on this world and to live this life. So I better enjoy it. And I found that Kratom was actually not very enjoyable. Being addicted to Kratom was misery, and being sober is full of joy.
Yeah, embedding yourself in a community like that where you're going to a meeting at least a day and you're talking and interacting with people by text or in a chat group that's wrapping yourself around with a lot of support. And I do feel when you describe that confident that you have a life jacket with you as you go forward. And so what are some of the benefits of that you've reaped since you've quit?
Oh man, let's see. I feel like my sense of self-esteem and self-respect are returning, and that's incredible. I don't deal with intrusive thoughts of needing to go and get Kratom. That's incredible. I don't have to spend money on Kratom or 7.0, and that's incredible. I've made a ton of progress in getting rid of my debt. That was one of my first goals when I entered recovery, and I haven't quite gotten back to ground zero yet. That's how deep the damage was, but I've definitely made a lot of progress. My relationship, by some miracle, and I credit the amazing understanding and forgiveness of my partner, but we are starting to heal, and that is just, it's so incredible to me. I can't even tell you. She's absolutely the most important person in the world to me. And despite everything that we've been through, things are actually pretty good, and we're able to work as a team in ways now that possibly we weren't even before this whole cycle of addiction and relapse and dishonesty and everything else. And I think it's because we've really put a lot of work into overcoming the codependent tendencies that both of us have that were part of what contributed to this cycle being able to exist for so long. And just being rigorously honest has also allowed that to happen, because I've realized that even telling little white lies is something that I can't afford to do, because little lies tend to accumulate and become bigger lies. And then dishonesty is a slippery slope. And so I have to be very careful not to even get close to the edge of it. So just trying to be honest at all times and realizing that there are many dimensions to honesty. It's not simply avoiding the telling of lies. It is the actively conveying all relevant, truthful information in a timely fashion to those that are concerned. I guess that would be a better definition. But yeah, my health is good now. I'm running nearly every day. My wife and I are hiking together, swimming together, walking the dog, spending time together. It's incredible. Yeah, there's just when I was at the end of my 7.0 use, every single facet of my life was deteriorating in a rapid and rapidly accelerating fashion. Literally everything. My physical health, my mental health, my financial health, my relationship with my partner, my social well-being, because I was incredibly isolated. My job was at risk. Everything in my life was going downhill so fast. And now, although it's not happening quickly, everything is moving in the right direction. And that's just amazing.
All right. And a couple last questions and we can wrap up here. Have you turned to rock climbing? I know that was something that you liked and it got tied to, I think, Kratom use, but is something you can do still?
Yeah, I actually have a little. I haven't been climbing super much, but I actually have gone out and I did have a good time. It was really fun. I'm mostly focusing on running right now, just because that's what's filling my cup. That and hiking, but yeah, spending time outside is just so important to me.
Do you have any travel plans coming up?
Yeah, we're going to Tahiti in about 3 weeks. So I'm really looking forward to that. We're going to get scuba certified, and that's something that I've always wanted to do and have never done. We're going to do it. We've got our classes all booked, and yeah, super excited for that.
I'm excited for you and your wife to be able to go on a trip like that, and probably not something you were imagining at Christmas last year.
No. And it's funny that you mentioned that, because we always talk about rock bottoms, but at Christmas Day, my wife and I were just going to spend the day together this past Christmas, but I was deep in my 7.0 addiction. And we woke up Christmas morning and she was sitting in bed drinking her coffee, and I made some excuse to go. I think I told her I needed to go get Zen or something. And I actually went to the smoke shop on Christmas morning at 7:30 in the morning, and I was so relieved that they were actually open. But as I was walking across the parking lot, I just felt like the lowest scum of the earth, that this is what my Christmas had come to, that I was secretly walking across the parking lot of the smoke shop to buy drugs, shitty smoke shop drugs. It was just awful.
And that doesn't have to be our life today or going forward. So yeah. Is there anything I didn't ask that you would like to say before we wrap up?
I've heard in some of your other podcasts that you ask people if they have any advice for those trying to quit. And I would just say my biggest piece of advice is to get honest with the people that you care about. I think I hid things out of fear because I was afraid that the people in my life wouldn't understand. I was afraid that they would be angry. I was afraid that they would leave and I would be alone and that they would no longer be in my life. And that kept me stuck in my addiction for a long time. I needed to tell the people closest to me what was going on. I could not quit otherwise. That was my experience. And I know everyone always says tell someone, but I can't stress how important that is. And also finding a community of people that you can talk to and not be afraid of being judged, who understand what you're going through. That is the other thing that has been critically important for me. So those are the two things that I would say.
Those would be my top advice too. And so it's worth repeating. And how did you find the podcast, by the way?
That's a good question. I don't even remember, but it was in the early days of this last quit. I think I was just searching for anything that I could do that was different from what I'd done before. And somehow I found this podcast. And this podcast actually led me to the Kratom specific recovery groups. I have to be forever grateful to you for that, Charlie. But yeah, in the first weeks, I listened to basically every single episode that was available at the time. And yeah, it was just super helpful to me. And then once I ran out of episodes and started participating in the communities, that just took it to the next level.
Oh, thank you so much for being on the podcast, Trevor, and sharing your story. And I'm sure it will resonate with many of our listeners. And let's stay in touch and safe traveling on your international journey there.
Great. Thank you, Charlie. Have a great day. Thanks for having me.